Happy to invite here Ojasaar from Solon Partners. So he has been doing a lot of legal stuff in US, in Estonia, doing a lot of startup mentoring, and currently working or spending his time more as an investor. So Yrjö, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'll stay.
You know, what I'm going to do is I'll bring our esteemed panel to the stage, but before then, just to set the stage a little bit, last year, same place, pretty much the same time, we had, I thought, a fantastic panel. And what we were talking about was why blockchain is really the next big thing, and really what the power that Bitcoin was interesting, but blockchain really held the power for the future and could entirely revolutionize fintech, all of the financial industries. Last week, I was reading how now blockchain investments have even surpassed all of the Bitcoin investments and are really leading the way in that area of fintech revolution, really, in that area. This year, I've got a real treat. Another panel of fantastic industry and experts from the machine learning, and I will bring up by distance first. All the way from New York, United States, we'll take, how about Chris Brown? He's a mentor and manager at a bunch of accelerators, including the Estonian connection. You, I believe, hold the rank of consigliere with the Startup Wise guys. And thank you for coming, Chris. He is currently at New York University Data Future Lab. And our other guest from the United States, from New York, we have Marie Joller. She's worked with the giants like Nokia, Virgin Mobile, with applications that are used by tens of millions of people. But really, deep in heart, I think the serial entrepreneur aspect of you is predominating, and now you are the founder, CEO of Scarlet. And it sounded a little bit like a digital valet or something, but you'll tell us more about it later. And we have two excellent speakers also from Europe. We'll bring up Friedrich from Munich, and Friedrich is working at BRAGI. Very interesting startup. If we're thinking now about smart earbuds, I guess. It's like Google Glasses for your eyes. So you'll be able to talk what you really do with your products in the panel as well. And finally, I also want to bring up Christoph. He is, you may recognize him already from Rockstart, one of the very premier accelerators in Europe, in Amsterdam. And currently you're with IBM Watson, Partner Innovation, is that correct? Super. So, like I said, fantastic panel, and Azeem, you've heard his credentials. So, the first question, because you didn't want me to get the discussion started too early. I promise you, we will not run out of steam, okay? Like I said, I've got enough hand grenades in here to throw at all of you. But the discussion got going about, well, how smart are these machines right now, and do we really want them to start, running things, and how does the interaction with this kind of robot look like? Maybe I want the people back. I mean, I know that when I'm making a phone call to my credit card company, I take on a voice of a very clear speaker who enunciates everything because I've learned how to speak to computers, right? Because I'm just like, no, I'm not going to say it again. So you say it right the first time. But that's us adapting to machines. Mm-hmm. So which is it going to be? Are we going to have to adapt to the machines, or are the machines adapting to us? And that's, open for all of us.
Okay, then I go first, right? My point of view is that we will see that machines will adapt to us, right? We have been adapting to the machines for quite a long time. It will be quite a good time from my perspective for startups because you know, my grandmother had always the issue to use a smartphone because she has to learn, she has to adapt how to use it and what to do with it. But machines will be capable of, you know, adapting to our behavior and however we try to engage with it, whether for a graphical interface still or for a language interface. The machine will just do whatever we ask it to do. But we're not there yet, but we're getting there.
And I think we definitely have a responsibility to make machines adapt to us, because we, as we've said just now, we've done a lot letting ourselves adapt to machines. I think the statistics are something like we check our smartphones something like 150 times a day. That's probably not healthy. So I think as humans we have a huge responsibility in designing machines that actually help us to interact with them in a very natural way. And I think it's going to be a mix of different things that actually depends on context. So it could be voice, it could be touch, it could be living in our ear, it could be living in our brain in some time in the future. So at Scarlet, we think that voice is actually one of such natural interfaces that we can interact with the machines in a way that we do in an everyday human way. Machines are very good at, you know, selecting information and presenting it to us in a way that is summarized, it's concise, and helps us actually dig ourselves out from the information overload that we've dug ourselves into.
But in terms of like voice interaction, I've always been skeptical of voice-controlled AI systems simply because I think humans have that natural barrier where we say, I don't want to talk to a phone. Like, I don't want to be seen on the subway talking to my phone and like trying to pretend that I'm not actually doing that. Like, I don't know that we're ever going to get past that point when it comes to our own comfort with that type of interaction.
Yeah, again, I think it's a matter of the interaction design. So again, it is absolutely true. I think it's weird for us as humans to talk to machines. And we're not terribly good at making very unambiguous requests. So we've seen a lot of demos in artificial intelligence where, you know, the script goes like, get me a plane ticket tomorrow morning from Houston to New York in a seat that, you know, Shaq would fit into. And there is no human that would utter that kind of command, you know, just like at the top of their brain. Absolutely. Usually it's a lot of back and forth, and then you get to the question of, isn't it just easier for me to go into my, you know, flight booking app and just tap a button? But what we believe at Scarlet is that actually it's not so weird for us to respond to information that machines give to us, and that actually tees up a much more natural conversation. So if machines are very good at, you know, understanding us, then they should give us answers, not force us to ask more questions. So if I actually get information from a machine using voice, which is a very good way to actually summarize things that I might need in my day, for example, then it's very natural for me to respond and say, hey, order me an Uber, or, oh, you know, today's going to rain, I might get my umbrella to go to work. Again, context specific.
But I think it still comes a lot down to the path that we need to understand not only language, but also a lot of the gestures and things that we are naturally observing when we talk to each other, right? If I say, I like your shirt, for example, you know I mean you because I look at you, right? This understanding focus, understanding attention, and at some point also intention is something that we're really good at, and I believe that also we will expect this from machines. And if they're not able to, cope with that, we will still feel we're talking to a dumb person or like a small child, and you don't want to have extremely deep conversation with a small child, usually.
So, is this on? Yeah. I agree with everything that Marie has said, so I'm not going to add to that point, but you've just raised a really important question, which is about what happens when we are talking to something that is pretending to be a human, and that isn't really a human. And we've touched 150 smartphone checks a day. If you believe the view that our attention is limited and therefore is the only thing that's really valuable, when you start to interact with a piece of software code that's pretending to be a human, but you don't realize that it is there some mode of trust that has been broken? So an example I can give is that there's an AI assistant called Amy, which is New York-based, and I used it to schedule my meetings and can be quite useful. But my former boss sent a 2-paragraph email to Amy explaining why he couldn't make a particular meeting. And at that point, I stopped and said, this is one of the people I respect most in the world who has just spent 15 minutes sending a bunch of text that is about to be parsed by a load of Python scripts. This is a problem. And there's a problem in the sense of level of trust, because I am masquerading Amy as somebody with agency, emotions, and feelings, when actually it's just a transaction. I think we need to be a little bit careful when we're at this moment of these early systems about what happens in the design pattern to the end user who thinks they're dealing with a computer and is giving up their attention for it.
Yeah, I've actually specifically encountered a situation where like somebody failed the Turing test on Amy.
Right.
To Friedrich, your point, I don't know that I want to talk to a computer the way I talk to a human. Like we had an email sort of back and forth beforehand around subjects that could be interesting, and somebody had brought up the uncanny valley and being able to get past this point where we're like, that's weird. Then like I think that maybe we shouldn't be striving to get to this point where it's like, oh, I can't tell whether this is a human or a machine, because I think there is something important about holding on to our identity as people, right? For some reason, like, we have this impulse to try and create technologies where we're like, it's seamless from a human being. Like, I don't know that should be the goal. But I mean, I don't know if that's what you guys are trying to do with Scarlet, but.
Actually, absolutely not. We're very clear that she's not human, and that actually has been both a benefit and a curse, because I would argue that people's expectations for robots are even higher. So we have users saying to us, well, I love Scarlet because I feel like she will tell me the truth. She's a robot, she won't lie. So if we design these robot interfaces, I think we're going to also have to think about the sort of societal or user implications of the expectations that people are going to have from those experiences. Well, and the margin of error they're going to give us as developers and designers to actually make mistakes or miss things.
But what you need to differentiate is interactions that we want to have and interactions that we need to have, right? Right now we have smartphones, so we're interacting all the time with everyone and everything. That's something that at least me, I don't want to have that, right? So I want to have a smart system that works for me, but not with me all the time. So what these intelligent systems will enable us in the future is that we can really go have quality conversations with things that we want, but if my, energy company is sending me an email about whatever they want to have from me, then the system should just do it, right? I don't want to interact with them. So whether a language interface, nor a graphical interface, nor any type of interface will help solve this problem, except that there's actually no interface at all for this kind of interaction.
I think you guys have probably seen Black Mirror. You've seen the episode where people have the ability to recall everything and rewind back, and even disputes between spouses. Hey, did you leave those socks there? You could go back, verify. It's like, as you can clearly see, the socks leaving your hand, and living in that kind of society, especially with disappearables, when it isn't clear whether you have the earbud or the assistant or what is recording what is happening. That is, I think, intruding into what is human and how we interact with each other.
I think it does, and we have a set of behavioral and cultural norms about how we deal with conversations with people, and we start to change those things when we introduce technology into our lives. And technology is generally extremely good, but there came a point, probably with the smartphone, but it may have come with the video game 15 years earlier, when it was too intrusive and too challenging. And we used to have conversations with uncertainty in them. Oh, I don't really know where the 1964 Olympics was held. And now that uncertainty has disappeared because someone pulls out Google and looks it up, and it changes the nature of the conversation that we have. And we have to ask ourselves, I think it's to Christoph's point, why are we even sitting together as a group of humans? Is it to exchange facts, or is it to have a discussion, listen to the other person, hear what they have to say?
Entertainment? I hope so.
Well, the zoo is entertaining also. They go look at all kinds of. I'm curious. I'm curious what the other panelists think in terms of, we've seen examples of AI gone wrong in that interaction, and we talked about one of those, which was the Microsoft chat bot spouting off, racism and whatnot, because it was just flooded with those kinds of messages from before. That could be wrong. Another idea, if we start using a lot of this data, as now a credit rating, the people who can afford and have a lot of this data will have a brand new way of discriminating. It's like, look, the computer says, sorry. And that's a problem. Do you guys see that as a danger?
Do we see it as a maybe?
danger?
No, absolutely. I mean, that already
And how do you
exists,
mitigate?
right?
You know, how do you, because clearly the potential is enormous. So we have to minimize sort of the negative, but really double down on the upside, the potential. How do we make sure that, you know, the negative is handled?
I mean, I think that we also need to think when we create these systems, right, about a more holistic way of looking at how they're going to be used, right? If you're an engineer sitting in Microsoft and you've got this tunnel vision around this technology that you want to create, and you're like, oh, this is going to be so amazing, and it's going to learn all this stuff, and like, we'll just put it out in the world, and it'll be brilliant within minutes because it'll have all the knowledge of the human race within seconds. It's like, yeah, but it turns out that like if you have really dedicated people being shitty, then it's going to learn all kinds of terrible knowledge. So we also need to think about how a technology is going to be used, how an intelligent system is going to learn, the speed at which it's going to learn, the complexity of the data that it's going to learn, because that will impact then how it's able to communicate with us. Right? So we have to be able to control that, but I don't think we're going to be able to ultimately, because you know right now Microsoft can create a system like that, but ultimately that's something that you know any empowered individual will be able to create within the next 5-6 years. So we're going to have all kinds of like Twitter feeds out there, you know, that are Tay, but we're not going to realize that they are, and it's going to take a really long time for people to sort of catch up on the joke that maybe somebody put out there because they just felt like they wanted to create this technology. Like, I don't know if there's a good answer to that.
I also think that currently we're just not there yet. It is just like asking another employee for his opinion, but it's not replacing, you know, the whole team when you install these systems. And surely the cost pressure on a lot of the governmental institutions will enforce that these teams or people get replaced, and probably also we will have these faulty systems in our environments, and we have to live with them, that they make mistakes.
I'm curious about what we all use. Do any of us use natural interfaces and artificial assistants regularly?
I have an invite to Amy, but I don't trust it.
We eat our own dog food. I think so. Yes, I do. I also have an Amazon Echo, and you know, I play around with hearables. So I'm pretty entrenched in the space. I think there's still elements like security, even I think more than privacy, that are still big open issues. You know, you take Alexa, for example. I mean, in the US, there's no issues or no discussion around privacy. You come to Europe, and the idea that a company as large as Amazon and with this commercial interest of Amazon is listening to every single word that is, you know, being passed around in your home, which is arguably the most private space you have as a human being. And even though I'm told that none of the data before Alexa recognizes her keyword is sent up to Amazon Cloud, Alexa also makes a lot of mistakes, and she thinks she's being called on when she's not being called on. So I think these are all very kind of valid concerns when we talk about designing intelligent systems. I mean, I think Azeem in a very articulate way kind of pointed out some of the challenges, and I think not least of it is the structural challenges. If we really have AI becoming very pervasive, I mean, Google just announced that they will have AI everywhere, and that is not a small statement. So, I mean, we definitely want to believe the positive side of things about how AI augments us as humans and helps us not to do the mundane work, so that we're freed up to do kind of creative work, as the Prime Minister this morning indicated. But I think the downside of it is that if you look at this large swaths of economy, for example, self-driving cars, if we take the drivers out of the vehicle, the large percentage of vehicles, you know, how do we retrain those types of people? So there's a lot of discussions, which I think is very progressive, around topics like universal basic income. You know, does that become sort of a new societal construct because we're going to have larger and larger portions of people out of work, especially kind of mundane, lower skill, kind of repetitive work who won't be able to be retrained. So I think this is, you know, we have so much great opportunity with AI, and there's so many ways we can really augment and kind of take our society to the next level. But I think it also comes with quite a bit of, you know, human responsibility to be smart about it.
Mm-hmm. So we developed on our own, on the Dash, for example, so that we apply currently more machine learning than artificial intelligence itself, I would say. Just because there would be too many rules, because the human complexity is so high, to embrace all the rules, all the complexity of the human behavior, to build it into rules. We just need machine learning and artificial intelligence to some degree to just make it happen, to bring also the interaction with technology to a new level. So that's on that side, and I think indirectly most of us are having an indirect contact with artificial intelligence and machine learning, because the, for example, preemptive policing, where the police is distributed in different areas according to computer systems, they run in the background of our societies already. This is one example. So we are currently living in a world where that is introduced on many levels.
I mean, technology was always an enabler in history. It was never a solution to any kind of problem, right? And when we look into the past decade or even before the 2000s, we're all using solutions or products out there that are using machine learning techniques or others since, 10, 15, 20 years. When we think about search engines, about the ranking stuff, if we think about, product recommendations, if we think about, kind of interfacing stuff. So we're all used to these kind of things. What happened now is that specific issues occurred that makes it available and accessible and affordable to a broad range of people and group of people who can build products with it. So I always call it, we put it up to the application layer. So now we don't need to have a deep understanding anymore, or don't need to have somebody with a deep understanding in our team anymore, basically, to enable my application to make use of a language interface, because you can connect this with various APIs, whether it's from large corporations like IBM Watson, or it can be from startups. So that puts this whole discussion about usability, what we had at the beginning about this interfacing, what type of interfaces make sense and which don't, to a different level. And that's why we see lots of different companies and startups out there trying out what makes sense in terms of interaction, what level of interaction is, makes sense, and what level of interaction or what type of interactions don't make sense. And right now, the technology media and everybody runs frenzy about AI. There's a huge philosophical discussion about, also society and the economical impact around it, where AI will, again, not be the solution. It's an enabler to help us to overcome these kind of hurdles and to help us to develop ourselves further. And maybe even AI will help us to actually define ourselves as humans. Who are we? What are we? What makes us, what defines a human act, basically? I don't have an answer for that yet, but we will see, right, where we're going.
You've mentioned here some incredible opportunities, that AI presents, including, in technology, but I think in medicine we've seen some fantastic advances that are purely due to the fact that for the first time we can take these mountains of data and make some sense out of them without even just being able to ask the question, not having to know the answer and letting the machine kind of do the rest. Do you guys, you want to talk about some of this in oncology, these are just fantastic examples, I think, really kind of give people an idea of what this could mean.
So there's one startup that I think they came out of YC in the last 9-12 months that sort of blows me away, like when I think about like learning systems, where essentially it has an ability to analyze, it has the ability to do virtual drug testing and to be able to create connections between different diseases, where we understand sort of the drug interactions on certain diseases, but in order to examine them for other diseases, we would essentially have to go through the entire process of clinical trials and testing and all of that, and it automates that process. So I mean, it's incredibly exciting from that perspective, just in speeding up sort of the process of getting drugs to market.
One of the examples that I was reading about was an oncologist in the US at a top center talking about how his job is now different, because at a top oncology center, he had case studies that he could think of and compare maybe of 6 to 7 case studies, and could keep those in his mind and know the similarities and the differences. And when they applied machine learning, he had 10,000 to look at, and he didn't have to look at them. The machine was feeding him the right answers, or the most probable answers. So that is a geometric increase of what that human can do, and that's at a top oncology center in the US. Many of the smaller places might only know of the one case and then basically be providing medicine based on that.
it's fantastic, and the ability to make sense of this data and make sense of connecting all of it, it also starts to ask really interesting questions about ourselves. So I read a paper earlier this week of a robotic, a sort of physically manifested AI that could look at people and figure out whether they were faking pain. So if anybody has a child, children fake pain all the time. And the average human can guess if they're faking about 55% of the time, so a little bit better than chance. And this AI system was up at the 85% level. And so it's vastly, vastly better than a human. And it starts to ask questions about, again, what are the things that we are really good at, or not? Because when you think about the doctor, the argument is always, well, you can get all the data, but the doctor is the person who can make the patients feel at ease, and the doctor is the person who talks to the patient, and I argued in my presentation that robots are not good at that. But there are some foundational building blocks that are coming together where they are getting better. And this takes us into the land of interfaces as well. So Apple bought a company called Emotions last year, which was very good at detecting your emotion from your face camera. So we might start to see, and there are probably people on the panel who know better than me, you might start, how would Apple use that? How would they read your emotion and say, we're going to change the interface because, you know, Friedrich feels a bit grumpy today. He looks a bit sad, so we're going to change the interface for him. And I think that's also a really interesting component.
There's an interesting Estonian startup, people here probably know, Realize, tracks sort of what you're focusing on and how you're interacting with the content. Yeah. Another thing that I'm curious about in this discussion, something that's hard for computers to do, or machines in general, is empathy. You know, and how do we want to have machines have empathy, or do we? Is it a problem if machines have empathy, and what are they once they do?
Nobody? I mean, it's basically learning, right? I mean, it's one thing for a machine to learn empathy and to learn our behavior. And therefore it can, you know, go back and then, you know, relate to that, what it has learned, and then react on it. But we humans tend to think that we are very unique, and don't get me wrong, we are in some sort of unique, but we aren't on the other hand, right? We have very similar patterns, right? When we think about, we're still eating food in a very basic way. It's not really individualized, right? In terms of fashion, of course, we have different color stuff, but we're still doing very much the same. And the same, and very similar to that is also the way how we sense things. So we're not that individual as we think. And therefore, for machines, I don't see it as that difficult for them to learn how we think and how we feel, and then to adapt this. Another thing is that we haven't figured out for humans what relates to our feeling exceptionally, right? We have senses, we know our 5 senses, some say we have 6, some even more, right? But we don't know how this relates. We have a gut feeling, for example, which is a great thing. But, you know, a gut feeling is just, you know, our sense, we sense something, and then we create a feeling out of it. So for a machine, it would be also possible to have a gut feeling. We just haven't figured out how this works for us, so we can't reproduce it. We can't replicate that kind of thing. And I think that's something that we haven't figured out. And when we always try with AI simulating human thought and how humans are, we can't just reproduce this because we haven't figured out for us. That's the current situation.
But I don't think empathy, though, is just a matter of you know, a series of things that we react to. Empathy is deeper, right? Empathy is like when we touch another human being.
It's something that you learn, right? When you're young, with your mother, grandmothers, fathers, you learn this type of behavior, right? You learn but the way
our bodies actually physically respond, for example, the human touch.
Who's going to teach the machine? And you know what we mentioned here before, the world's largest sort of hive network, the Tesla cars. So is the Tesla going to hit the dog or the squirrel or the baby or the human? Which way is it going to veer, you know, when all of those are in front of it? It's going to have to choose, right? So is that how the machine learns? The algorithm that, oh, squirrels, not so much. We don't care about those.
It should actually
You're not even going to get a ticket.
It should actually learn not to hit anything, right? That's per se, to, you know, no accidents, car accident anymore, depending, no matter if it's a car,
yes.
right? That's the point. So that's the ultimate goal, right? But I'm for example extremely sensible of overheat, right? Because I learned as a kid that this is something that I don't feel. But I know my wife, for example, she can kind of put her finger into boiled water, right? So it's everything about how to learn specific things and how the sensors are. And that's the same for a machine. So everything what we do, everything what we are, it's whether it's empathy, whether it's feelings, whether it's how our reactions, it's all learnings. It's all things that we learned. And of course, DNA, what we have learned over the generations and generations through the evolution as well. But it's all learning. So a machine can learn these kind of things.
But
You think you can learn emotions?
Of course.
I fundamentally disagree. I think this is actually a really interesting debate because it's sort of like, where do you delineate this sort of human versus machine experience, right? And it's kind of a philosophical debate in AI, right? But I think it's really interesting because, I mean, I would argue that empathy is something you cannot teach a machine on a fundamental level because it's part of the human experience. And then I think the differentiator is that as humans, we are born, we live, and we die. And teaching machines what death means and sort of what sort of an organic body means is something that I don't know if we really crack that or if we ever can crack that. I was reading this interesting article just not long ago about this robotic arm that was being taught what pain means. So it's sort of various levels of pain. If it's just a little bit painful, it would retract. If it was really painful, it would retract again. It would learn not to touch the surface again. But it is, what is is this not the damage or the sort of the creation of a memory of a robotic arm, is that comparable to like a child, putting their arm into a hot water? I think that's sort of where I would personally draw the line.
Well, and more importantly, like if a child puts its arm into hot water, like as adults, we would look at that experience, we would see that experience, and we would feel something. Like a machine can only respond to that stimulus by saying like, oh, like can I fix this? But it can't provide empathy, right? It can't comfort a child in the same way that a parent can. And I think that to your point, like human beings, like we have a deeper level of connection, right, that I don't know can be mimicked.
But only because we don't know what they are. We can't explain it. We can't explain, right? We have a connection, right? We like each other, we don't like each other. It's because we sense something. We just can't explain it, so we can't replicate it.
So
there are different people in different places in the world where they value death differently, right? For some people, it's a high value. We would never kill someone. In other places in the world, people are just killing someone for a penny or something, right? So it's all how we perceive the world, how we get learned on it, and how we get trained on what's right, what's wrong, and
Sure. So how much do you love your wife? Like 24?
Very much, of course, right? Like, what else should I say in here, right?
From Latitude.
Like how do we? I think that there, all the talk about AI, right? And you're saying all we need to do is learn and understand more deeply our own sort of functioning. I think that comes from a worldview that says that we have the ability to quantify everything, right? And I think that is actually a problem. Like that is where like Tay came into it, and they're like, yeah, well, we can't quantify certain emotions. Like I hope at some point you're not able to say like, yeah, well, I love my wife 72, and this other one might, well, she's 73, so I guess clearly I should be done with this and move on. There are things that we can't put numbers to.
But this discussion is fascinating, but it hinges on the question, can we recreate that fundamentally human experience some way?
Exactly.
Right? And
Do we want to?
But even if we don't want to, so I think the challenge about proliferation of technology, whether it's gene editing or AI, is that it doesn't matter whether we don't want to, someone will want to, in Silicon Valley or in Shenzhen will want to. So the question this Christoph's point hangs on is if we can find some way of replicating all of these things perfectly, then maybe you can get empathy in a machine. And we'd probably agree that we just don't know how to, right? Every time we start to make progress on understanding the brain and peeling back the layers, there's another thing there that we didn't expect. There's another interrelationship. Neurons change their DNA, new paper in Nature this week. We didn't know that last week. We do know that now. But then the question is that an intractable problem? Or is it just a really, really difficult problem that we're working our way through? And then the other argument might be, well, maybe maybe dolphins do feel emotion towards us, but they don't have human brains. And maybe octopuses can have some relationship to us, and they don't have human brains. So maybe there are paths to that kind of empathy and emotion that don't take the path of the mammalian brain or the cephalopod brain, but actually just through silicon, we get to something that passes a higher level Turing test. And is that then the same as empathy, and is that then the same as emotion? And I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying back arguments I've read elsewhere, but I think a lot of what you're saying hinges on that one question, which is this computable? And it doesn't feel like where the best AI companies are today, we're anywhere near that, or the best researchers. But it raises a really interesting question.
And we haven't even gotten into, the artificial body discussion, cyborgs and whatever it is, right? Which enhances our capabilities to sense things and whatnot, right?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting topic, and I think worth addressing. When you asked earlier who uses AI, well, all of us do, right?
Who uses AI in the audience? Can everyone put their hands up? Who uses something that is AI smart?
Okay, no, all of you do, because all of you are using OCR, optical character recognition, things like that. They've become so normal, you don't even realize it, you don't even notice it, And now with Skype translating and things are beginning to happen in such a way that you're not like, oh no, the machines are taking over, but you're saying like, thank God the machines are taking over. That I can communicate now in whatever language and be able to talk to all of you, even if I don't speak the one common language. So in that sense, we've got a couple minutes here, positive, negative views for the future. When 1 year from now, Latitude again, what do you think?
Well, quick positive is we're taking advantage of a lot of this technology right now, which is why the discussions end up being about the limitations and the downside, because we're already gaining from the upside. And so we sit here, we're going, do we really want this? What are all the downsides? So that is a maturation of the discussion and a sense of its direction.
And in that sense, an exciting time, because it's no longer that, oh, it's coming. No, it's here. Now it's just a question of what treasure trove, everything that we can get out of here.
We always talk about the downside. Media talks about downside, right? So
well, that sells better too.
Yeah, it sells, of course, right? But what we can do about it is also what, as he mentioned before, is, everybody needs to become involved. If we have fear that, the power gets controlled by, just a few big entities in the world, then everybody should become active. Everybody should get involved. Everybody should try to build something with it, to understand it, to, do something about it. That's the only thing that I think, or I hope at least, will change in the next 2, 3, 4 years, due to the availability and the broad media coverage and everything, that people really start caring about it and thinking about what it can do for them.
It's more a hope, I would say. I hope that we don't throw in population data into these algorithms only, but rather have individual learning on us personality-wise. Because currently, we're always scanned by the machines which are on a population level, are clustered. That's the maximum, but we don't have really individual quality artificial machines that work for you, with you. And I hope that there's more personalization with that coming.
I hope the same, and I think there's definitely a tremendous amount of positivity to look forward to. We talked a bit about, sort of medicine, education, just across the board, making humans much more efficient, giving us back time to actually do things we care about, do our jobs better. And I think sort of closer to home, what I'm working on is also starting to design interfaces that also help us to interact with the technology in a way that gives us more time in our day, sort of gives us more calm moments and ways to kind of be more efficient and more mindful.
And I'm first not optimistic and then very optimistic. I think there's going to be a point of extraordinary chaos and disrupt within society. And if we're able to survive past that, I think it'll be phenomenal and extraordinary and kind of magical.
Usually in that chaos, you also find some of the solutions and the answers that take us forward. So that's exciting. I think we've got some parting gifts for everyone, like your Oscar package coming up.
Thank you, everyone. We don't have time for any questions, but find them while walking around. So thank you, everybody.